Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for joining us for Revolutionary Design, Modern Architecture in New England with Jane Oneail. New England is known for its history and its traditions, but it is also home to some daring and innovative modern designs from some of the world's leading architects. How do giants in the field like Frank Lloyd Wright, Walter Gropius, Lois Kahn, Philip Johnson, and Maya Lin combined the expected and the familiar with the innovative and experimental? This program introduces audiences to each architect and walks you through their notable works in New England locales. And as I mentioned, this program is led by art historian Jane Oneail, owner of Culturally Curious. Jane curates and delivers art appreciation programs to audiences throughout New England. She holds a master's in art history from Boston University and a master's in education from Harvard University. Born and raised in New Hampshire, Jane has worked at some of her state's most esteemed cultural institutions, including the League of New Hampshire Craftsmen, where she served as executive director, and also at the Currier Museum of Art, where she held the role of senior educator. Jane has also taught at the college level for more than a decade, most recently at Southern New Hampshire University. And again, as a reminder, today's program is sponsored by the Tewksbury Cultural Council and the Friends of the Tewksbury Library. So all nearly 150 of us, and I think that number is going to continue to tick up. Let's give a big virtual round of applause to Jane for joining us this morning. And Jane, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Robert. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning. We're in for such a treat. I love these properties so much. So today we're going to have the pleasure of zooming through 3 New England states and looking at 6 incredible properties. 3 of them are homes, including the one that we see on the screen. We'll be getting back to it. And 3 of them are on academic campuses. Now, the homes are open to the public seasonally for tours. The campuses, there's varying degrees of accessibility there, so I might recommend you get in touch with the school before you go try to go right into one of these properties. I will say today's program will really save you on gas and time, because we're going to introduce you to these spaces so that you can really appreciate these innovative designs. But with that said, I hope this program inspires a few road trips in the months ahead. Now, whenever you use the terms revolutionary and New England together, we tend to think about New England's history and its past. When New England thinks about architecture, we tend to celebrate things from the 18th century. We've got John Quincy Adams' birthplace over here on the left from 1735. It's an old salt box colonial. We've got a federal style mansion over here on the right. We are not necessarily accustomed to thinking about modern architecture with the same sort of reverence. And I think we're only beginning to preserve great examples of modern architecture really within the past couple of decades. So with that being said, let's turn our attention to how we'll spend this next hour together. This is going to be such a treat. So we are not going to be looking at anything traditional, no New England colonials today. I've broken it up into residential and academic buildings. So we'll start off with the Bauhaus simplicity of Walter Gropius, turn our attention to the organic architecture of Frank Lloyd Wright, and then finish up with the mid-century modernism of Philip Johnson. In our second half, we'll be looking at the monumental geometries of Louis Kahn, the deconstructivist whimsy of Frank Gehry, and then consider the minimalism of Maya Lin. So plenty to cover. This is a little bit of a preview of what we'll see when we get to Frank Gehry, but let's just dive right in with Walter Gropius. And I noticed we have at least one person joining us today from Lincoln, Massachusetts, so they probably already know what we're getting into. All right, so Walter Gropius, who we see here at sort of the beginning and near the later part of his career, he was a German-born architect, and he was a pioneer in terms of modernist architecture. Now, architecture was in his blood. He managed to survive World War I in Germany, and his father and his great uncle were already architects, so he decided to follow in their footsteps. And it wasn't just that he was a great designer. He was an influential teacher. and an influential thinker when it comes to modernism. So when he was still in Germany, he founded a school called the Bauhaus in 1919. And this is one of the academic buildings on campus that was designed in 1926 by Walter Gropius. It's now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And this is an example of the international style of architecture. And some of you at home might be sort of yawning, thinking, you know, I've seen a zillion buildings like this. And the reason you have is because Walter Gropius invented it. And there's so much about it that is, well, it's very functional and it is very low cost. It became a dominant style really until the 1970s. So when we think about the international style, what we'll see are a lot of flat surfaces. There's a purposeful doing away with anything that's ornamental, really. This is all about paring things down to the basics. There's almost no color here. It's black, white, and gray. We have a real reliance on mass-produced industrial materials, including a lot of glass. And so the end result is this kind of streamlined appearance. We might associate it with almost looking like factories or warehouses today, but this was certainly innovative for its time. So as you might remember from your history classes, Hitler in Germany hated all things modern, and he actually closed this school, the Bauhaus, in 1933 when he came to power. So Gropius and his family, realizing that they were sort of in the crosshairs, they left Germany, they moved to London at first, but eventually settled in Massachusetts so that Gropius could teach at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. Now, Helen Storrow, as in Storrow Drive, she was a patron of the arts, and she heard about Walter Gropius and his plight and decided to donate 4 acres of land to his family in Lincoln, Massachusetts. And this is the end result. This is a 3-bedroom, 3-bathroom house. It's about 2,300 square feet. And it's about 1 mile from Walden Pond, if you know that history, and about 15 miles from Harvard Square. And really, not since the shots rang out in nearby Concord, Massachusetts, had anything so revolutionary happened in the Boston area. Now, suffice it to say, the neighbors weren't entirely pleased with this I mean, they would consider it a modern monstrosity moving into the neighborhood. This did not fit in with the aesthetics in Lincoln. The neighbors referred to it as a chicken coop, and they were just convinced really that this flat roof would cave in after one snowstorm in New England. But Walter Gropius had put a lot of thought into this. Here he is, an architect with the ability to now design his own house, and he's following these Bauhaus principles that he used to teach to others. So we've got a simple form, like I said, this flat roof. We've got ribbon windows, really a whole long stretch of windows in this pattern here. Oftentimes they kind of start at the edge of the building and expand almost to the other side. So we've got an open floor plan, a heavy use of glass, and industrial materials. Now, Walter Gropius was also really mindful of the location. He was considerate when it came to the siting of the house, and he built this house with many traditional materials to the area, including a painted white facade. If you have really good eyes, you can probably just see he's using vertical clapboards here instead of horizontal. He's using a porch to invite his guests in and to protect them from the elements. There's a brick chimney to the house and also the fieldstone foundation, which you see here at the bottom. Now, like I said, despite the nods to New England traditions, the neighbors were not pleased. So let's move towards that main entrance there. And you'll notice that there's this projecting porch. It's kind of coming off of the house at this interesting diagonal here. I love it because it almost feels like the house is stretching out towards you at the driveway to try and protect you from the elements. So we have one main entrance here. Once you come down underneath this protected porch, there's even a screen of glass bricks here, really sort of a modern material used in an elegant way. But you'll also notice there's another entrance just beyond it, a metal spiral staircase that leads up to the second floor. Of course, that's more of a private entrance, and you'd have to walk by the front door in order to get to it. But it's interesting that we have these two elements on the front of the building. Now, the house was featured in the New York Times shortly after it was built, and it I mean, the Gropiuses had thousands of visitors in the first few years they lived in this house. And apparently one old lady asked Mrs. Gropius, "Isn't it very strenuous to always live so much ahead of your time?" Which I think is so adorable. But to the Gropiuses, this was a really functional house. It just worked for them and the way they lived. So let's go inside and see what works. And maybe you can consider for yourself too, if it would work for you. Now, this is the front entryway over here on the left. This is the front door. You can just barely make out the handle there. So you go in past those glass bricks. And when you come inside, those glass bricks extend into this entryway, creating this light-filled space, which is wonderful. Notice how there are curtains and with a runner that's built into the ceiling here. They're floor to ceiling, black and white curtains that kind of match the exterior aesthetic of the house that way. And there's even a built-in rug. So you can't come into the house proper without wiping off your feet. There is an open closet just beyond it, and it has industrial metal piping. So all of these industrial materials that are made very plain. Now I have these two images here just to make clear that some of the materials from the outside are also brought in. So we have more of that vertical clapboard here. This is, once again, a nod to New England, but literally turning things upside down because clapboard is always done horizontally in New England. So he's being a little bit playful here, and I can definitely appreciate that. You might be wondering what the floor is here, and these are cork panels. Now off to our right, we see the staircase leading up. Here's just some slightly different views of that same staircase. And we see more of this industrial metal tubing that sort of protects you as you're going up the stairs. You can use it as a handrail because this is almost like a traditional New England staircase that curves around back on itself. Now for the Gropiuses, they are using in every possible opportunity, easy to find, rather affordable materials. But this black handrail over here on the right is the one custom made, or one of very few custom made elements in the house. And I just love this kind of wormy like kind of swivel to it as it goes up that staircase there. All right, so we are going to continue on into the dining room. And the dining room is really all about intimacy. You'll see on one side, we've got even more of these glass bricks. And when the room behind it is lit up, it had so much atmosphere to this sort of quaint space here. On the other side, we have a giant plate glass window. So imagine sitting down to this table in the morning. You'd feel like you were so connected with the nature that is presented in the backyard. And the Gropiuses really loved tending to this property. But it's a small table. And so when you gather around it for an evening dinner, say you're going to have a few other professors from Harvard over, there's this almost like a pinhole light fixture in the ceiling that just sheds light on the table and surrounding it. So it's almost like a cone that brings you in. And to make the space even more intimate, we have more of these curtains. You can draw the curtains so that you can't even see the living room. And it's all about this intimate space in the dining room. Talk about a really smart way to kind of make your house adaptable and to really consider the way people use these spaces and what might feel emotionally good and safe. So here I have for you just moving into the living room just beyond here. We get the chance now to consider the way this house is sited, because Walter Gropius did something so smart here. We see this wonderful chair, and it might look sort of familiar to you. Maybe some of you have chairs like this with the ottoman already in your house. This is a laminated birch plywood chair designed by the Bauhaus furniture designer Marcel Breuer. And Breuer designed almost, a lot of the furniture in the Gropius's house, including this metal tubing furniture over here. So these are all Bauhaus prototypes. They're mass produced today. You can buy them for about $120 at IKEA. But at the time, really nothing like this existed. And you can't imagine Walter Gropius bringing all this stuff from Germany and putting it into a traditional New England colonial. So here, getting back to the siting of the house, we can see that the living room is just drenched in the sunlight. And how wonderful would it be to sit in that chair and read a book? but it's sited so that it's bathed in sunlight only during the winter when the sun is low in the sky. During the summer, when the sun is higher, this room is in shade and it's actually quite cool. It maintains the temperatures inside the house quite effectively. Now there's a Bauhaus daybed here where apparently Gropius did a lot of his reading, and you'll notice that there's all these bookshelves in the background. Now, to your eye, there's probably nothing very innovative about these bookshelves, right? Everybody has bookshelves in their house, but most people have wooden bookshelves that are separate pieces of furniture that they can move around in a room. Walter Gropius is using these kind of industrial fixings to attach the bookshelves and install them on the wall here. And really, before Gropius, nobody was doing things like this in their house. So he's got the built-in bookshelves here, and they function so nicely. Okay, we are going to head upstairs from here and take a look at the primary bedroom. This is where Walter Gropius and his wife slept, and it's a really unusual design. There's something really charming about it, though. You'll notice here's their bed. They have a tapestry, I believe it's from Iran, hanging over their bed, sort of functioning almost like a headboard. But there is a wall going down the center of their bedroom with a giant plexiglass window right here. Notice there are curtains here too. And you might be thinking, what is going on here? There seems to be a sort of interest in making their bed visible or invisible. On the other side of that plexiglass, of course, there's this kind of dressing table or makeup table for Mrs. Gropius with a mirror built into it. So why did they choose this unusual design? Well, in fact, once again, it was all about temperature. The Gropiuses like to sleep with their windows open, and to have this room divided with another door here meant they could keep their sleeping chambers nice and cool, and then it wouldn't impact the rest of the house, or if you had to get up in the middle of the night and head over to the bathroom. So it's a really smart way to deal with temperature and climate. Now, I also wanted to show you their daughter's bedroom. Gropius was very considerate of his 12-year-old daughter when they moved to Lincoln, Massachusetts, and he asked her what she would want in her room. And so he actually gave her or delivered on almost all of her requests, other than I think having a sand floor so she could pretend that she was at the beach. She got her own little reading nook over here in addition to her bed. And we can see that there's a built-in curtain once again to provide that extra sense of privacy, which I think any young girl would really appreciate. She had also asked for the opportunity to sleep under the stars. So he gave her her own door heading out to a terrace, which we'll take a look at in just a moment. But I wanted to just point out again, we have all of this Burr designed furniture here, including this chair with the caning. This is Gropius's desk from the Bauhaus that he designed. And then you'll notice these vertical slats on the wall just above it. In terms of their length and their shape, they roughly echo the expanse of windows over here on the left. So it's kind of continuing that motif, but those vertical slats also provide an opportunity to hang things on the wall without damaging the wall itself. So let's head out onto this terrace that he gave his daughter. Let's take a look at what that looks like. Who wouldn't want to spend time here? This is actually Mrs. Gropius enjoying that same terrace. This is the door that goes out to that spiral metal staircase that's at the front of the house. So he gave his daughter a lot of freedom and privacy with this room. And you'll notice too that this wall here is pink. That's not because he had a daughter, it's because this is just a slight variation for the Bauhaus. It was to reduce the glare of the sun over here. So really playing up the attributes of the siding of the house once again. All right, so this brings us to the idea of what was the impact of this house? How did it affect the community? Well, it spurred on quite a bit of modern architecture development. In fact, the furniture designer, whose name I mentioned, Marcel Breuer, actually was gifted some property from Helen Storrow as well. And he built his house right next door to the Gropiuses. This is Breuer's house over here, and it spurred on or inspired a number of other modern architects to create houses, to build houses in the greater Lincoln area. So today, the Friends of Modern Architecture in Lincoln still host events and tours of all of the innovative architecture in their community. In 2000, the Gropius house became a national landmark. It's a testament to Gropius's influence in his life's work. And in 1984, the house became a museum under the umbrella of Historic New England. So as I mentioned, this is a house that's open for tours seasonally, and I highly recommend getting over there. Now, the next architect we're going to consider is Philip Johnson. And once again, I have sort of a younger photo of him and a photo of him from later on in his life. The New York Times once referred to Philip Johnson as the elder statesman and the enfant terrible of American architecture. So a provocateur in some ways, I would say. He was born in Cleveland. He actually studied at Harvard under Gropius, and about 5 years after he graduated, he published a seminal text on the international style of architecture. So it's, he's not even 30, and he's playing a real role in the world of modern architecture, at least in America. Now, as an architect, he made his mark really arguing for the aesthetic side of architecture. And he claimed he had no interest in buildings really, except as works of art. In 1978, Johnson won the gold medal from the American Institute of Architects, and that is the highest award the American profession bestows on any of its members. I should mention that Gropius also won that. Okay. So let's turn our attention to Johnson and New England. Now, almost all of you have probably seen a Philip Johnson building up close and personal. He was hired in the early 1970s to build an expansion, really to double the size of the Boston Public Library in Copley Square. So this is his answer to the original McKim building from the late 19th century. In some ways, it matches the scale of that original building. And what I love about this photograph here is that in the back, we see the Hancock Tower designed by I.M. Pei, who was a fellow student at Harvard. So all of these guys kind of know each other. Okay, so beyond that, Philip Johnson created a structure here in New England that it was revolutionary in so many ways. This is his famous glass house from 1949, and it's in New Canaan, Connecticut. Now, I call it his glass house because this was a design for himself. He often referred to himself as being his own best client. Now, the glass house is the beginning of what eventually becomes a sprawling complex. He continues to acquire land all around the glass house. And by the time of his death, there's like 49 acres and 14 different buildings on this property. We'll get sort of a sense of some of these other buildings, but we're going to zoom in on the glass house here. And really what you see is what you get. Johnson is quoted as saying that the idea for this house grew from an experience he had where he saw a burnt wooden village where there was nothing left but foundations and chimneys. Now, I mean, he sort of had a front row seat to World War II, and another architectural historian said that the glass house could be read as a Polish farmhouse purified by the fire of war, of everything but its architectural essence. So what we're looking at is a steel frame structure. All of its walls are glass, all of its doors are glass, and the structure itself is it's about 1,800 square feet. So we've got a kitchen over here, a dining area, a living room, a bedroom, a study, and a bathroom. Do we really need anything more than that? I ask you. And that's what Philip Johnson is asking us in some ways. Now, of course, what makes this house spectacular is its connection to nature. In a glass house, the landscape is the wallpaper and it's the artwork. Actually, Philip Johnson said, I have very, very expensive wallpaper. Now, Philip Johnson really didn't come up with this idea on his own. He sort of borrowed big elements of the inspiration for the glass house from another architect named Mies van der Rohe, and his building the Farnsworth House, which unfortunately just wasn't completed before the glass house. So really, Philip Johnson sort of came in first and gets a lot of credit for that. But the glass house does contain a lot of furniture that was designed by Mies van der Rohe, including the furniture here, which has that same kind of international style Bauhaus simplicity here. So just a few elegant streamlined pieces over here. We're going to turn our attention. Oh, here's just another sort of crisper view here where you can really see that beautiful connection to nature as well. And it's really all about framing up these views, right? The glass house invites us to sort of feel like we're outside and inside at the same time, apart and yet apart simultaneously. The glass house is a structure that really aims at becoming invisible. And there's just something so beautiful, really almost romantic about that. Now, if we shift our perspective just a bit, look past the living room, we've got our dining area over here. There's a big sculpture by Eli Nadelman that is, I think, permanently sited there. We have another door just beyond the dining room. Here is, once again, the streamlined furniture of this very sparse, pared down dining room. Now, one thing I really love about this space, I don't know if anybody else here experiences this, but I have a particular seat in my dining room that I really like, and I can see all the doors, and I don't feel like my back is to anything that would otherwise make me vulnerable. But with the glass house, and literally everything's a great view, nobody can sneak up behind you. Every room or every seat at this table is a great view. And I think there would be a certain joy in trying out all of the different seats on a regular basis. Now, from the dining room, we're going to shift gears over to the kitchen. This is a quickie tour because it's such a small house. And you'll see that we have a very small sink and a very small stove, just, very basic, very utilitarian here. But Philip Johnson wanted nice, clean lines for this house. So something that I really appreciate about this kitchen is that you can actually fold the countertop over those utilitarian spaces to maintain those nice, clean lines. And the counter is essentially just this L shape over here. So minimal storage. But, for Philip Johnson to live in this house by himself, did he really need more? Now, if we pull back once again, we have a view into the living room here that prioritizes the view of this brick cylinder and this huge fireplace. Now, for such a modern structure, I think there's something kind of funny about the fact that he's prioritized the fireplace. It's like almost a 19th century quaintness to it, this idea of gathering around a roaring fire here. But it also plays an important role because just around the other side of that fireplace is the area where you would need the most privacy. And that's where the bathroom is. And it's, once again, very small, basic, and utilitarian. Notice how the shower is really just defined by this circular lip here and the curtains that are on a similar circle track up above. So we're going to finish up our tour of the glass house by looking at the bedroom. And I guess this is considered the study over here. We do have some closet space that divides the bedroom off from the living room, but the bedroom is just as open to the rest of the property as that house is. So imagine waking up in the morning with this kind of connection to nature. Also, this kind of vulnerability. Anybody could see you getting out of bed, no matter how good or bad you look in that moment. So how would you feel to be a guest at this house? It brings up an interesting point. Where did his guests stay? Would they want this kind of exposure, right? So Philip Johnson solved that problem. He built a guest house. It's sort of slightly diagonal from his own glass house. And it's essentially the same floor plan. It's a building that matches the glass house in every way, except it's not about transparency. It is about privacy. And from the vantage point of the glass house, the guest house looks like it's solid brick, doesn't it? It does have 3 big circular windows, but they face away from the glass house. And just a quick peek inside, there is Philip Johnson standing alongside one of those windows. So you can accommodate plenty of people when they stop by your glass house. Now, Philip Johnson and his long-term partner, David Whitney, became significant art collectors. But where do you display your art if your walls are made out of glass? The answer is this underground bunker here. This is the painting gallery, which was designed in 1965 on the same property. And the entrance here was actually modeled after Agamemnon's tomb. So I think that this is such a brilliant plan for a painting gallery. There's no exposure to UV rays, no exposure to light. You go through that door we were just looking at, through this passageway, and then into this space that is not a circular space. The circular sort of bulbs here are places to store the art, which are all on these carpeted panels. And so you can easily rotate your collection by rotating the walls. It's almost like looking at posters on display in a store. So you can have up to, I think, 42 different works of art on display. And Johnson and his partner donated a great number of their works to the Museum of Modern Art while they were alive. But you can see they've got a great collection here of 20th century paintings. So there's Frank Stella and Rauschenberg, Cindy Sherman, and of course, a little bit of Andy Warhol. This is Andy Warhol's portrait of Philip Johnson. So one last building I wanted to show you at the Glass House is called Da Monsta. And I'm not saying it funny, that is how it's pronounced. Now this, all of the outbuildings beyond the guest house and, well, I should say most of the outbuildings beyond the guest house and the Glass House are these what are called follies. They're kind of miniature buildings. They're little experiments. Philip Johnson built Da Monsta in 1995, and he was originally conceiving it as like a visitor center for people who would come to visit this property after he passed away. But the experiment here with these curvilinear walls made from modified gunite, the result, I found it's actually a very disturbing building to be inside. You can just get a sense of it with like the leaning walls and these strange corners. It can make you physically sick to be inside Da Monsta. So in fact, when you go and visit the Glass House, you can go to the visitor center, which is just across from the train station in New Canaan, Connecticut. Now, I'd mentioned Andy Warhol before. These are two photographs of Andy Warhol at the Glass House, and here's David Johnson in the background. Now, Johnson didn't use the Glass House as a primary residence for very long. He actually had to hire security after a certain point for when he was there, because people were naturally very curious, like, what does it look like to live in a glass house? So there were always kind of like peeping Toms. And let's face it, there is something really intriguing about being able to peek in on somebody who's living their life in a glass house. It's almost like a precursor to reality television or social media in some ways. So no wonder Andy Warhol loved it. It seems like stepping into this glass house is like stepping into a glass box. That's almost like stepping into a TV set. It could make you famous in some way. So a natural spot for Andy Warhol. Now, the Glass House didn't function as a primary residence for Philip Johnson for very long. Instead, he started to use it for entertaining. And so it was kind of like this endless salon for artists and architects to come and talk and think and experiment with new ways there. So the Glass House resulted in tremendous recognition for Philip Johnson, not just in architectural circles, but with the public at large. So the house was featured in Life magazine, and the New York Times magazine did a whole set of cartoons about it. In the end, it's a structure that prompts us to consider some of the most fundamental questions about architecture and how we live. Okay, our next architect really needs no introduction. Frank Lloyd Wright is America's most famous architect of all time. He's also the oldest out of all of the architects that we're looking at today. And over his long career, he was continually creative. He designed buildings, furniture, landscapes. He wrote books, he taught architecture, and on occasion, he even designed clothes for his clients to wear in the structures that he created for them, just so everything could kind of go together. Okay, we all know Frank Lloyd Wright because of this iconic building called Falling Water, designed in 1935. And it is the home, of course, that sits on top of this waterfall, looking for all the world, like these modern cantilever elements just spraying out of this rocky outcropping here. While that was a major project for a wealthy client, Wright also developed an affordable house type for the average American, and he called that the Usonian, and that's what we're looking at over here on the right. This is the very first Usonian. In fact, it was designed about a year after Falling Water, and it's modest in scale. All of the furnishings are included, and it was a place to create a new sense of privacy, really the opposite of the Glass House, but this is prior to the Glass House. And it's a way to sort of protect the modern American family from busy streets and reconnect them with nature. So let's take a look at a Usonian that is open to the public, and it's right here in New Hampshire, Manchester, New Hampshire, where I am coming to you from. This is the Zimmerman House. It's just across town for me. It was designed in 1950 and it was completed in 1952. The post-World War II Usonians that Wright designed tend to have more bells and whistles. They aren't so pared down. The Zimmerman House is 2 beds, 2 baths, and about 1,800 square feet. The clients paid roughly $60,000 for this house back at mid-century, when the average home cost about $20,000. So in today's money, it would be probably just over about $500,000 for a house like this. Wright designed this house for a middle-aged professional couple, and he never came to New Hampshire to oversee the building or to examine the site, but he did carefully study the site plan. And even though Mrs. Zimmerman invited him up to the house again and again, he placated her with a little play on her name. He said, "Oh, Mrs. Zimmerman, I know your house from A to Z." So to suffice it to say, the mill town of Manchester, New Hampshire had never seen anything like this before. And even though it looks nothing like the Gropius house, believe it or not, all of the neighbors referred to this house too as looking like a chicken coop. It is a house that is gorgeously preserved. And that is because when the Zimmermans, the clients, passed away, they bequeathed this house to the Currier Museum of Art, which operates tours of it. And I would recommend booking those tours about a month out in advance. So if we look at the Zimmerman house from above, it's sited on a roughly 1 acre lot. And Frank Lloyd Wright, instead of having the house face the street, as most of our houses do, he sited it diagonally. And part of that was to create a very private backyard, especially because this is a fairly busy thoroughfare over here on the left. And part of that was to take advantage of passive solar energy as well. Now, the Zimmerman house is very hard to photograph because it is such a long, low house. So I apologize that some of these images look a little bit distorted. But when you drive up to this Usonian house that Frank Lloyd Wright designed, you don't drive into a garage, you drive into a carport. Now, Frank Lloyd Wright really didn't believe in garages. He felt like, horses need stables, but cars don't need an actual structure around it. But he did love cars, so he was in favor of a carport, and he actually coined the term carport too. He didn't invent them, but he coined the term. And there is something about this carport that is just magnificent. It frames up this view of the backyard. You sort of peek through the entire house into this beautiful view of nature. And it really is a glorious view, no matter the season, no matter the weather, if it's snowing or if it's raining. It is a spot for you to get out of your car when you get home and to take a deep breath and just, relax. I mean, think of what you see when you pull your car up to your home. It might be a lot of stuff in your garage, who knows, but Wright was setting the stage for relaxation here. Now, Frank Lloyd Wright is famous for creating houses that sort of hide the front door or draw attention away from the front door. We do have a pretty understated front door here, but it is marked by this huge granite boulder right alongside it. And this once again speaks to the fact that Wright was very familiar with the site plan here. And even though this isn't, a house sitting on top of a waterfall, this is a way to acknowledge the natural features of the site. This is a very private facade. Once again, these are very high concrete block windows here. So you don't get any sense of what it's like inside until you go inside. And I have a site plan for you here, and it is upside down, only so that it corresponds to our experience of the house so far. Here's that carport. Here's the front door. We're going to go inside, take a right, and then head into what Frank Lloyd Wright called the garden room. Most of us would call it our living room, but there's a lot going on here that is all about nature. Actually, this is a great opportunity to talk about his sense of organic architecture. And now organic architecture doesn't simply mean the materials or the way things are put together. It's sort of all of these things. Here we have an autumnal color palette. The materials are natural and celebrated for their inherent beauty. Notice the board and batten cypress on the ceiling. And once again, those concrete blocks that we saw from outside, the bricks are like these pristine, perfect bricks all throughout the house, indoors and outdoors. So Frank Lloyd Wright believed that a building should complement its environment. And we saw that with that front entrance. So everything should be one sort of unified space here. Everything should sort of grow naturally out of this. So one of the things that he did was he developed this 4-foot by 4-foot grid for this house. I know it's nearly impossible to see it on the floor, but the floors are scored with a 4-foot by 4-foot grid in this concrete floor. And you might recognize that the shape of the cushions on the back of this very long bench here are also roughly 4 feet by 4 feet. Just above them, we see a derivation of that. We see those concrete block windows, which are 2 feet by 2 feet, and inside them, a pane of glass, which is roughly 1 foot by 1 foot. So the Zimmermans here, they loved music. And in some ways, you can almost think of this organic sort of growth from the 4-foot by 4-foot grid is relating to music, because you can think of the 4-foot by 4-foot as being a whole note, the 2-foot by 2-foot as being a half note, and then the 1-foot by 1-foot as being a quarter note. So all of this kind of relates to music, but also to the way things actually grow. Now we have this big long bench here. It doesn't necessarily look like the most comfortable bench in the world, but what is it facing? We notice that there are these big brick piers here and we'll turn our attention now to those big brick piers and how each one of them frames up a view of that back garden. This is what Frank Lloyd Wright referred to as breaking the box. He literally just didn't want rooms in a house to be one box, rectangular box after the next. So he's breaking it up by using these brick piers. And he is framing up nature here with a 4-foot by 4-foot window in a much more intentional way, I would say, than Philip Johnson at the glass house. Now, the glass here does blend seamlessly into the ceiling, creating the illusion that the interior ceiling just continues out seamlessly to the outdoors. He also has built-in planters inside the house that create this illusion that the outdoor planters also continue inside. Each bay of these piers actually has its own watering system too. So there's a lot here to draw our attention to nature. There's not a lot of two-dimensional art on the walls at the Zimmerman house because it's nature that is the show here. Now, there's one more component to the way he frames up nature and the experience that he creates around it that I just find so brilliant. Notice the lights up above at the top of the image here. We'll zoom in just for a moment. There are lights behind these little louvers here to simulate the experience of sunlight coming down, dappled sunlight coming down through the leaves of the branches. And so if we go back to this image here, imagine that same kind of light coming down, almost creating the sense that these brick piers are like the trees out in the garden. And that sunlight is actually coming into the Zimmerman house. Okay, if we look back to through this garden room, there's a huge fireplace. Like Philip Johnson, he had sort of a romantic notion, Wright did, about families gathering around this fireplace. It's almost an antiquated 19th century notion about family life, but fireplaces figure very large in Frank Lloyd Wright's design. Here he is showing off. He's cantilevered this massive pier of bricks. There is no structural support over here to maintain those bricks in the air. He's also added a concrete lintel here that he has split almost down the middle. So he's showing off, he's saying, I can create a structure that can seem to levitate like this. And, you know, the Zimmermans did actually spend a lot of time around their fireplace. Here's Mrs. Zimmerman reading a newspaper right underneath this, you know, ton of bricks hanging over her head. So she had a lot of faith in her architect. These shelves over here are going to lead us into what Frank Lloyd Wright called the dining loggia. It's a brilliant space because this is a house for a couple, and it's a small dining area really for 2 people. And the term loggia refers to an open air walkthrough. So this is, it's like a glorified hallway, but all of these doors here have screens on them. So as you're sitting at your table, this is that same table that we see over here, you can open up all of the doors, you can have the screens, and essentially be outside, smell nature, hear nature. It's a glorious way to live. And some of you might be thinking, yeah, but what happens when you have friends come over? Frank Lloyd Wright had a plan for that. Notice that this table here has these notches in it. So you can actually move their dining room table back into the garden room. This table here, I think it's a hexagon, has a split down the middle, and you can pull it apart, put the dining room table in between, and you can have about 12 people all sitting together on this banquette, enjoying those views of nature. So it's a very kind of flexible house at that too. And all of this is possible because there is a vertical, or I should say a vertical grid in the house as well. Everything is roughly 13 inches apart from each other, whether it's a chair to a table or a shelf to a shelf. Now we're going to head into what Frank Lloyd Wright called the workspace. This isn't the kitchen. This is where everything is happening. Your laundry, your cooking, your cleaning, and it's right at the center of the house. There's a clerestory window up here. And this is, once again, I think it's a really brilliant design. This is a home that he created for this couple to live the rest of their lives in. Nobody's schlepping any laundry up and down basement stairs. It's all happening right here. In fact, there isn't a step in the house. And in fact, the Zimmermans lived here until their final days. So we've got a lot of the same elements that we've seen throughout the house already, the open shelving, the modern appliances. Let's just take a quick peek at that primary bedroom. It's very small in scale. Wright has preserved a lot of floor space by levitating some bookshelves here. Imagine keeping the same bedspread for 35 years. That's what the Zimmermans did. They were so wedded to the design that they got from Frank Lloyd Wright. Now, this is such a wonderful space. Here's that same bed, and you can see how the master bedroom is designed to connect you with the backyard here. And once again, we see the glass sort of blending seamlessly into the wooden ceiling construction. The Zimmermans actually had to lobby for those curtains. They wanted a little bit of privacy. It just speaks to, I think, modern architecture not always blending so well with the practical aspects of living. So if we look at the Zimmerman house from the backyard, we can see that it is a lantern. It is all glass in the back. So when the Zimmermans asked for as much privacy and opportunity to enjoy nature as possible, that's what Wright delivered on. In so many ways, I think of it as like a modern vacation house. It's oriented towards the nicest view and allows for the maximum connection to nature there. So in terms of influence, Frank Lloyd Wright's Usonian houses had a huge impact. Actually, a friend and colleague of the Zimmermans had Frank Lloyd Wright build him a house just about 4 doors down. This is the Khalil House, which was recently acquired by the Currier Museum and is now also available for tours. I think if you see one, you see the other these days. Now, beyond that, the idea of a modestly sized ranch-style house with a carport certainly proliferated. There's a ton of them in my hometown in Manchester, New Hampshire. I will tell you that my house looks a lot like the one that you see on the screen, and it was built just about a decade after Wright's Zimmerman house, and it's just across town. Okay. So let's turn our attention to our next modern architect. We're moving out of the residential realm now and into the academic realm. This is Louis Kahn, and this is his contribution to modern architecture in New England. He was born into a poor Jewish family in the Russian Empire, which is now Estonia, and he and his family emigrated to the US when he was just 6. He founded his own architecture firm in 1935 and taught architecture at both Yale and UPenn. He also received the gold medal from the Association of American Architects. And at the end of his life, he was really considered one of America's foremost living architects. So Louis Kahn is probably best known for these monumental, almost monolithic designs. His designs are massive, they're heavy, and for the most part, they don't hide their materials. And as pared down and as simple as these buildings may look, there's something sort of quasi-religious about them. Every building sort of seems like a temple. This is the 1965 Salk Institute for Biological Studies in San Diego, California. It's named, of course, for Jonas Salk, who's the virologist who developed the first successful polio vaccine. here's just the same view or the same building from another view where we can see that there are actually windows to it. And that Louis Kahn actually really liked windows and natural light. And that's going to play a huge role when we get to his library in Exeter, New Hampshire. Now, Robert, I'm not sure if you can hear me right now, but I'm just looking at time. And I almost feel like just the way the timing of this has played out, I almost wonder if we should cut this into a part 2 because we have almost an entire second half of this program to give, and we're sort of running out of time. So what I might do is encourage Robert to think of this program as a 2-part program. We'll have the second part for you in the months ahead, and I will start taking a look at the chat now. We will have the opportunity to look at Louis Kahn and look at Frank Gehry and look at Maya Lin. But we'll break that out into another program just to make sure that we are honoring everybody's time here.
Yeah,
So
Jane, I can hear you. I am here,
Okay.
and that's fine with me, Jane.
Okay.
And we can talk about a potential June date offline.
Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect. Okay. All right. So I'm sorry, everybody, that we didn't get to go through everything, but I wanted to give every structure at least a little bit of time here. So thank you, everybody, for understanding about that. I'm going to take a look at the Q&A here. Elena asks, wasn't that Gropius outdoor spiral staircase highly impractical in the snowy Northeast? Great question. Maybe that was a little way to keep his daughter inside. Yeah, I would say it's not a staircase that most adults would want to traipse up and down, but it was really something. It was like a fanciful gesture in so many ways, just for his daughter. Pat says, when you drive through Lincoln today, you see a lot of modern architecture. And yes, Gropius definitely started that trend. Susan says, can you tell me where to get the dining room chair? I would love them in black. Thank you. Susan, those dining room chairs at the Gropius house were designed by Marcel Breuer. And so those are like Bauhaus designs, but they were prototypes. Let me just get back to them here. So you could probably, I mean, if you were to do like a Google search, I mean, those chairs today would be in an art museum because they were the prototypes, but these sorts of things are of course mass produced today. So if you just if you did a Google search on like Bauhaus dining room furniture, you could probably find where similar works. And Carol asked, when was this built? This was 1938. Sorry, I didn't mention that. Is Brewer's house in Lincoln privately owned? I believe it is. I don't believe they offer tours of it, but I'm not totally sure. Somebody asked, how much engineering did the various architects do, or did they demand other structural engineers to make their designs buildable? That is the $1 million question. And I'm sorry, I don't have the answer for that for you. My sense is that most of the architects at the front half of this program, so our Wright, our Gropius, and our Philip Johnson, had a good sense in terms of the engineering aspects of what they were doing. But I think as we continue on, many of these designers are working with architectural firms to sort of iron that out. And they also have the benefit of using computer design software as well. But an architect like Gropius didn't have that luxury. Mary says, I took a tour of the Zimmerman house in person and your tour was better. Thank you, Mary. James says, happy to come back for part 2. Thank you. And I'm glad that you're already thinking about visiting the Gropius house. Let's see here. How does the Gropius house and the Johnson houses deal with snow? That's a really good question. I'm not sure if they have any sort of process for getting rid of snow off of the roofs. I mean, there's all sorts of flat roof structures in New England. They're typically not homes, but I'm not sure. I mean, unless there's a massive storm, I'm not sure that you need to do something unless if the building's properly supported. Wendy asks, were Gropius and Frank Lloyd Wright friends, competitors? Great question, Wendy. Frank Lloyd Wright was really not the type of person that would have a lot of friends in his own field. I think if anything, they were aware of each other and each other's work, but they probably weren't buddies. Somebody asked, am I doing IMPay too? I might have to slide him into the next session, but I didn't have him originally in this program, although I was kicking myself about it. Rena says, wondering about heating with all the glass. It was definitely a struggle. You can notice that a lot of the heating conduits are right under the glass to try and deal with that. Having a single plate glass window is not ideal in New England setting. I should say at the Zimmerman house, to sort of fly forward to that, the concrete floor inside the Zimmerman house, which is continuous throughout the entire home. This has radiant heating in it. So there's pipes with hot water running through it. And once again, Wright took advantage of passive solar energy here. So this house is nice and toasty during the winter when the sun is low in the sky, and it's nice and shady. And those concrete floors are so cool in the middle of the summer. It works really well until your heating system fails and you have to jackhammer the floor, which is exactly what the Currier had to do when they acquired the house. Let's see here. What is the name of the group in Lincoln? They are FOMA, Friends of Modern Architecture. And I do believe they have a website. If you just Googled FOMA Lincoln, you would find that. Mary says the window boxes in the Zimmerman house seemed like they have plants that reflected the ground cover extending, bringing the outdoor in. Was that part of the design? Mary, you hit the nail on the head with that one. So there is actually a little window box just beyond this wall outside, and the glass of these in between these piers just goes right down through the soil here. So it was to create this kind of seamless transition between the outdoors and the indoors. Really, I've never really seen anything like it before, and it's very charming. Believe it or not, these window boxes just thrive too. Within a few years of the Zimmermans living there, they had like plants growing all the way up the side. Diane says, I have a lot of respect for Wright's designs, but he fell down in my estimation when I learned that one of his early houses, you had to break glass squares in a wall to change the light bulbs. Oh my goodness. Yeah, sometimes it's like we have to suffer for our beauty, don't we, Diane? There isn't always that same level of practicality that we appreciate today. Thank you for sharing that. There are some light bulbs in the Zimmerman house too that are very, very tricky to change. And in fact, the Zimmermans had to ask small children to change them because that was the only way to really access them. Let's see here. Carol says, my college library was full of those living room chairs seen in the glass house. The library was built in 1970. It was built of poured concrete and orange. Was the predominant interior color. Well, that's really like international style, and it speaks to what a dominant style it was, right? I think probably all of us have had an experience with a site that looks so much like the living room in the glass house. Like when I look at it today, it reminds me of like a doctor's office. It's so pared down. It's very simple, it's very elegant, but it doesn't have the warmth that I think a lot of us associate our homes with. Wendy, thank you for your comment. She says, I'm a Lincoln resident. Many deck houses have Usonian characteristics. It's interesting to think about how all of these things kind of bleed in together. Somebody asked, do you like the interior curtains on the Gropius house? Or do you like the interior curtains on the Gropius house? And did other designers follow this practice? In some of the photographs of the glass house, you can tell that there are like screens up. Even over here, I think this looks like a curtain that was installed over here. So I think they are a little bit of a practical necessity in some cases. Those interior curtains dividing the spaces, I don't know how functional they are, but I sort of love the idea of them in some ways. I love the idea of being able to make a space feel a little bit more intimate. I feel like that's that childlike feeling that we all have of like, let's make a fort. Dory says, can you provide the information on the organization that offers the modern house tours? I'm sorry, I don't have their website ready, but if you Google FOMA, Friends of Modern Architecture in Lincoln, you'll find it. And then Disha says, flat roof sheds rain and snow by center drain, roof slopes to middle, see triple deckers in New England. Thanks for adding that. Yeah, so I mean, a lot of architects make it work. Susan says curtains are dust collectors, and although they are lovely as room separators, big cleaning bills. Okay, I always love and appreciate like a realistic, a practical sort of counterpoint to the romantic notion that I might have. So thanks for adding that, Susan. Again, everybody, I apologize for just cutting this off in the middle, but I think time-wise it works. And I'm so eager to share part 2 with you, because let me tell you, by the time we get to Maya Lin's library, I think we'll all just feel so dazzled. So thank you for your understanding, Robert.
Yeah, no worries. We love being the guinea pigs, Jane. I know this was the first time you presented this program. You just launched it May 1st. So, these things happen, and hey, we're going to get a second wonderful program, so I can't complain too much. So folks, look for an email from me later today with the recording, with the feedback survey, with information about some other upcoming virtual art history programs. And before I send that email, Jane, I will contact you. Maybe we can figure out a date for part 2 sometime in the next few hours. All right, so folks, look for that email later today. I hope everyone enjoyed this morning's presentation, and I hope everyone has a great rest of the day. So thanks so much, Jane. Thank you to the 160 plus people that tuned in, and I hope everyone has a good one. Thanks again.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.